All right, Stephanie Richard holds a master's degree in international development and humanitarian aid management from the University of Laval in Quebec, Canada. A strong advocate for social justice and human rights, her career has been dedicated to promoting access to mental health services within marginalized populations. Since graduating from her Bachelor of Social Work in 2015, Stephanie has been involved in multiple projects on both national and international forums, fighting for equality for individuals who have severe and persistent mental health disorders is the foundation of her practice, and she continues to show her commitment to the enhancement of mental health services globally. In 2015, Stephanie served as a social work consultant in a psychiatric NGO located in West Africa. This work experience abroad fostered her interest for international development. More recently, Stephanie led the development of a mental health and psychosocial program aimed at supporting Rohingya refugees and host communities in Cox's Bazaar, Bangladesh. Her work was grounded in the belief that all human beings have the right to dignity and access to quality mental health services. This project was carried out in the world's largest refugee camp, where Stephanie spent 6 months collaborating with community members and international stakeholders to support the launch of this program. The program is still running to this day, and Stephanie remains involved in an advisory capacity and continues to contribute to on-the-ground research on postpartum depression among refugee women. The World Health Organization also has published an article describing Stephanie's work, and you can read it on their Disaster Shock website. Stephanie is currently residing in the Canadian Arctic and working as a territorial mental health training and development specialist with the government of Nunavut's Department of Health. Stephanie's role is focused on the expansion of an Inuit workforce to better address mental health needs across the territory. Her current work is aligned with her ongoing dedication to building capacity within rural and isolated remote communities. So we join her now for her presentation on the integration of mental health and psychosocial supports in refugee camp settings, increasing access for Rohingya refugees through primary care NGOs. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you for having me. I am very grateful for this opportunity to speak about the mental health program I developed in Cox's Bazaar last year. It's a project I hold very near and dear to my heart, and I am excited to share with you how it came to life. A little disclaimer before we get started. Brian did mention that I live in the Arctic, and that unfortunately means that sometimes we have internet outages and connection issues. If I do happen to get disconnected during the Zoom presentation, I will just hop right back on. So it'll just be a few moments, hopefully. All right. So in 2019, I spent 6 months in Cox's Bazaar, Bangladesh, working as a mental health coordinator for a national NGO, Hope Foundation for Women and Children of Bangladesh, which is an NGO working in maternal and infant health, and an NGO that is involved in the Rohingya refugee crisis. And through the next slide, through the presentation, I will be going through the different steps I took to create the program, and I'll focus on explaining the humanitarian and international guidelines that I use for the implementation. So I know some of you are probably familiar with the Rohingya crisis, but before talking about the program, I really think it's important to make sure everyone is aware of the situation in Bangladesh and the context surrounding the Rohingya crisis. First of all, as you can see on the map, Myanmar shares a border with Bangladesh and the district of Cox's Bazar. It's right alongside the Rakhine state where the majority of the Rohingya refugees are from. Um, the Rohingyas, they're the largest minority Muslim group in Myanmar, which is a predominantly Buddhist country. And they have a very, very long history of human rights violation. They've experienced decades of violence, discrimination, oppression, and conflict. And even before fleeing to Bangladesh, they were stateless. In Myanmar, they were denied citizenship for multiple years, in addition to multiple violations to their human rights. They are not allowed to vote. They need permission to get married. They have a limit on the number of children allowed per family. They have limited access to healthcare and education. And in Myanmar, they're not allowed to leave their village. So that's been going on for multiple years. And in August 2017, there was a particular attack that led to a spike in violence against Rohingyas in the Rakhine state. The Rohingya army started burning villages, killing civilians, raping women, and ultimately forcing people to flee to Bangladesh. Now it's 2020. It's been 3 years since the massive refugee influx. The UN has referred to it as a genocide and as ethnical cleansing. And to this day, there's still no possibility for Rohingya to return to Myanmar, nor to be granted Bangladeshi citizenship. While they were in Myanmar and throughout the events that led them to flee to Bangladesh, the Rohingya refugees directly experienced and witnessed tremendous amounts of violence. And the vast majority of them lost family members, oftentimes killed in front of them. Many women have been raped by Myanmar soldiers. Multiple children in the camp were born from these rapes. And in addition to previous potentially traumatic events they've experienced, they're now living in cramped, overcrowded camps in makeshift settlements with limited access to food, to water, to education, and to basic necessities as a whole. I'm going to read a few survivor stories. They're difficult to hear, and while I read these stories, I would ask that you keep in mind that this merely captures the suffering the Rohingyas have gone through. When you're in the camp and you ask someone their story and to tell you a bit about their background and their life, those are the stories you hear most of the time, all of the time. So these stories are a small glimpse, but they really, unfortunately, represent everyone's story. So the first one, Minera's family walked for 16 days and slept in the jungle under polythene papers at night. They collected rice from other abandoned houses and cooked it in a small stove, which they made on the roadside. Whenever the family tried to use a main road, the Myanmar army would fire blanks at them to force them back into the jungle. Lukia was not inside her family home when it was attacked by the Myanmar army, who used a rocket launcher to set it on fire. Her parents, brother, and husband, sadly, were inside and died instantly. The raid on our village started at 3 a.m. I saw a child being thrown onto the fire, and my sister was raped. The violence continued for hours. We escaped by hiding in the mountains for 2 days. On the way, we found a 10-year-old boy crying that his parents had been killed, and he walked with us all the way to the camps. My mother was killed during the violence in August. I do not know who killed her because at the time there was chaos. So many horrible things happened. I have an 18-year-old brother and a 12-year-old sister, but we got separated as we were fleeing to Bangladesh. I have been looking for them since I arrived through announcements in the camp and bulletin boards, and I haven't found them yet, but I will keep looking. My biggest problem is finding food. So those are our day-to-day stories and really just a small picture of the stories we see in the camp. So not only the Rohingya refugees have experienced multiple forms of violence and discrimination before coming to Bangladesh, but they're still in a highly vulnerable situation while they're staying in the camp. On the screen, there's a list of mental health risk factors that was put together in a report written by the UNHCR. And we'll go through some of the risk factors for mental health. So they include human rights violation, lack of space, cultural stigma about mental health, substance misuse, sexual and gender-based violence, breakdown of traditions, loss of identity and exclusion, children being separated from their parents, separation from community members, lack of food security, being unable to work, and poverty. So those are all elements that increase the vulnerability to mental health and psychosocial difficulties for Rohingya refugees that are still in the camps. So Hope Foundation is the national NGO for which I developed the mental health program. As I previously mentioned, it is a maternal and infant health primary care NGO that offers a range of services such as C-sections, fistula repairs, and a whole range of pre and postpartum care services. They have been involved in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazaar, and been providing health services to the host community. And host community, it means the Bangladeshi community. So they've been providing these services since 1999 through the Hope Hospital, through birthing centers and medical centers around the district of Cox's Bazar. But in 2017, when the massive refugee influx happened, Hope Foundation decided to support the response by building a field hospital in the camp, as well as by opening some mobile medical clinics. The main goal was to provide maternal and infant health care to refugees. And really, in the early stages of the crisis, the organizations were focused on making primary care accessible because people were wounded and because people were injured and needed immediate medical attention. However, given the circumstances, it became evident that the wounds were not only physical, but also deeply psychological, and hence the creation of the mental health program for Hope Foundation. So before we go into the different steps, I would like to introduce you to Rumana. Rumana is the mental health program coordinator over at Hope Foundation, and she is the very first staff member I hired in July of 2019. She was initially hired to be a counselor, but we eventually decided together that I would train her to become the mental health program coordinator and to take on my position to ensure a better program sustainability. And she has been doing really great at it. She filmed this video this week to give you a bit of an update on the program. And yeah, it's about 2-3 minutes. So I will press play, and you have subtitles on the side as well if you want to follow that way.
Hello, I'm Romana Rafiq, Interval Coordinator from Hope Foundation. Uh, I am working here from last year, 2019 July, 1st July, and This organization, Hope Foundation, started this mental health program through Stephanie Richard from January 2019, and now slowly we are expanding our program day by day, more and more, and we are working with both host and FDM peoples, and already we have our psychologist, program officer, two counselors, and we are trying to hiring more, and we have a psychiatrist who is visiting our field hospital for FDMN twice in a month. Also, we are planning to start to uh, take him in our host community hospital at least one or two in a month. So it will be a huge turning point for us. And uh, for me, yes, our program is going well, and because our patient is increasing day by day, more and more. We are finding more uh, difficult patients. We are finding more challenges, and we are handling it with very effective way. And yes, we have also challenges, like we are expecting more criteria patients in our Rohingya communities and host communities also, but we have lack of uh, manpower, because in here, not only here, it's a worldwide stigmatized program that mental health, we thought that mental health is not a mandatory issue, but it is a need. It is very important for everyone. So we have to spend, or we have to inform everyone that no, we are here, we are trying to provide our services, and there is a whole team who are waiting for to receive the patients, to provide services. So this is my challenges to continue this program. I think I need more manpower to uh, inform everyone. And yes, for me, I am very grateful to Stephanie and my team member and everyone else, because we are really going well. Thank you.
All right. So now that you have an overview of the situation that led to the program, I will go ahead and present the different steps that led to its implementation. So step one was the needs assessment. Step two, training and capacity building, creating a team and hiring, having infrastructures and supplies, having clinical supervision, and establishing a local partnership. First of all, in creating any kind of program in a humanitarian setting, there are some international guidelines that need to be taken into consideration. For the mental health program, I based the different steps and activities on the IASC guidelines on mental health and psychosocial support in emergency settings, as well as on the MH-GAP intervention guide from the WHO, and I also use the Sphere Handbook. The IASC, just a bit of background, is it's a coordination forum that is led by the United Nations to improve the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and it supports the cluster approach. For those who may not be familiar, the clusters are groups of humanitarian organizations in each of the main sectors of humanitarian action. So as you can see on the image, there's the health sector, nutrition sector, protection, etc. So in Cox's Bazaar, one of the first things I did was to join the MHPSS, Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Working Group. that was led by the UNHCR and IOM, which is a subgroup of the health sector where all the agencies providing mental health and psychosocial supports meet on a regular basis to make sure that their interventions are coordinated. Then another framework I used was the MH-GAP, which I will talk about later. The MH-GAP is an intervention guide and training guide that was developed by the WHO to scale up mental health knowledge for non-specialized healthcare providers. And then I also use the Sphere Handbook, which is also an international humanitarian guide that establishes the minimal standards that we should be following in the different segments of a humanitarian response. We won't go over the entire mental health care standard in the Sphere Handbook, but I would still like to highlight some of the key areas that were taken into consideration when developing the mental health program for Hope. This is a bit a snapshot of the mental health section in the Sphere Handbook. So first of all, developing programs that are based on identified needs and resources, orientate staff and volunteers on how to offer psychological first aid, make basic clinical mental health care available at every healthcare facility, make psychological interventions available where possible for people impaired with prolonged distress. And some other items to mention are the MH-GAP training, again, that is also recommended in the Sphere Handbook, and the supplies of essential psychotropic medicine. This is the IASC multi-layered support pyramid that's included in their MHPSS guidelines. And the pyramid is used a lot in the MHPSS sector to organize mental health and psychosocial supports and to develop a layered system complementary. Is someone trying to speak? No? Okay, I'll just continue. So the pyramid is used to organize mental health and psychosocial supports and develop a layered system of complementary supports that meet the needs of different groups. And then if you look at the pyramid for Hope Foundation, the mental health program is mainly situated in the layer number 3 and the layer number 4. So layer number 3 being focused, non-specialized supports, and layer number 4 being the specialized services. So step 1, needs assessment. When I first arrived in Cox's Bazaar at Hope Foundation, my knowledge around the mental health context within the refugee camp was very limited. So it was important for me to take some time to conduct a needs assessment by holding semi-directed interviews with the different staff members and stakeholders, and to observe the different areas of services within the organization. When working in any international capacity, I think this is definitely an essential step, in that as someone from the outside, our perception of the needs may be completely different than the needs that are perceived by local staff and local community members. So part of the interviews was focused on asking them what they would think would be helpful for their organization. And then the interviews also allowed me to assess the understanding around mental health in general across the organization. And mental health in Bangladesh and in many countries is still very secondary and unknown. It's very much stigmatized. People associate mental health with epilepsy, developmental issues, often even relationship issues. And if you ask about what symptoms a person that's experiencing mental illness may be experiencing, the answer we get often is, oh, it's people that walk naked around the village, which really, it is an example, but it only captures a very small part of what mental illness and mental health encompasses. Step 2, training and capacity building. So because mental health is unfortunately poorly understood by both the host community, staff members, Rohingya communities, oftentimes people won't seek services for their mental health. And this means that generally the only way of reaching individuals who may be experiencing mental health is through primary care when people come to the hospital for a physical health concern. Something we see a lot too is people coming to the hospital repeatedly for somatic or medically unexplained symptoms that are in fact related to mental illness rather than physical illness. When primary healthcare providers are not familiar with mental health, this means that there's a low detection or even no detection at all of mental health conditions. And this is why the training part, training step was a key element in developing the mental health program for Hope Foundation. By becoming familiar with things like what's mental health and what's mental illness, what's stigma, then the medical staff can better identify individuals who may be struggling with their mental health. And this is why training such as introduction to mental health, introduction to mental health awareness, and psychological first aid were provided. And the psychological first aid training mainly was really key across the organization because psychological first aid is really an approach that medical staff can integrate in their day-to-day practice, in the way they talk with patients and in the way they may now be able to use a more trauma-informed lens. So PFA can be used by doctors, midwives, nurses, and anybody that's a part of the facility. So creating a team, in addition to training the medical staff in basic counseling and PFA, a key part of the program was really to hire permanent staff members for the mental health program. In going to work in the refugee camps, I could have provided counseling services myself, but that was never the intention. The goal was to train and hire people to make the program sustainable and long lasting. And it was really important to me to hire local staff and draw from local experience. So this slide and this list shows a breakdown of the mental health team. We have Rumana, who you've seen in the beginning. She's the mental health coordinator. We have a program officer who takes care of all the logistical needs. We have one psychologist who's able to provide clinical support in a bit more in-depth interventions and provide information sessions to patients. And we have two counselors that visit inpatient departments to identify potential patients and provide psychoeducation. And then we have, the last one is community mental health workers. And the community mental health workers they're really key as they do some outreach. So they go do home visits in the camps to talk about mental health. They go and they raise awareness. They discuss the services offered, and they encourage people to come and see the mental health team at the Hope Field Hospital. And we also have Rohingya refugees working at the field hospital in the camp. They have small roles, sometimes as reception clerks, and they're also able to really help breaking the stigma and identifying people who may benefit from mental health services and then refer these people to the mental health team. And last but not least, here we have the doctors that were trained in MHGAP. The MHGAP is a crucial component of the program. because when doctors are trained in using the MHGAP intervention guide, they gain knowledge around how to diagnose mental illness and how to provide psychoeducation and counseling supports, but mostly they learn how to prescribe psychotropic medication. So having medical staff trained in MHGAP means that we then have the ability to prescribe, and that the doctors are now able to use a different lens when they conduct their routine exams. In order to have a functioning team, some basic things such as infrastructures and supplies were needed for the program. And really finding a space was one of the big challenges. Over time, the mental health program was allocated a counseling room. So we have one in the camp, the blue solar cube up on the left corner. And then we have one in the Hope Hospital as well, because we need to ensure confidentiality, especially because mental health is so stigmatized. And we also had to get some psychotropic medicine supplies. Hope Foundation donates medication to Rohingya patients as they don't have the money to pay for their prescriptions. And to create the medicine stock, we use the World Health Organization's list of essential medicine, which is a standardized list. And the majority of the medication was, and fortunately still is, donated by WHO. And so people are able to receive medication when it is needed. Well, clinical supervision. Step 5, because we're working with staff for whom mental health concepts are still relatively new, there is a need for clinical supervision and oversights, and doctors need to be able to consult with experts when they aren't sure which medication to prescribe or what type of mental illness they may be encountering. And one of the big assets of Hope Foundation is the contribution of psychiatrists from the UK and the US, and all of them are originally from Bangladesh. And those psychiatrists provide support and clinical consultations through the telemedicine device. Hope Foundation has 2 telemedicine devices. As you can see, there's one on the image. There is one in the camp as well, which means that the staff can connect with international psychiatrists through appointments when needed. And something to mention as well is that in the earlier stages of the program, we also had WHO international psychiatrists coming to the field hospital to provide clinical supervision to the newly trained MHGAP doctors. So this is the final step, and probably one of the most significant steps as well. It is the partnership with Sadar Hospital, which is the governmental hospital in the district of Cox's Bazar. In Bangladesh, there is a total of 250 psychiatrists in the entire country, and Bangladesh has a population of 164 million people, so a very, very large population. And if we break it down, that means that it's one psychiatrist for 656,000 people. So this is a very low number. In Cox's Bazar, there is one single psychiatrist, Dr. Kafil, who's in the picture, and he works at the governmental hospital, and he also has his private practice. And fortunately, with the help of WHO, we were able to arrange a partnership with Hope Foundation for him to visit the field hospital in Camp 4 on a monthly basis. He's the only psychiatrist in the camp and has now even increased his visits to twice a month. And also to be mentioned is that it's not solely for Hope Foundation. Other health organizations in the camp are able to refer their patients to come see him on the day where he's visiting Hope Field Hospital, so that more and more people can receive services. To finish off, I have this table that shows a summary of the services that were provided since the launch of the program in July of 2019. if you look, as you can tell, it started at very small scale, very little numbers, but we saw a significant increase. We reached a peak in February as people were becoming more familiar with the services and as the team was expanding. And then slowly with COVID, unfortunately, the team was not able to go visit the patient. So there was a decrease. But now, again, if we look at August, September, we're starting to see the number increase again, which means that people are going to the hospital to seek those services. To finish off too, the next steps will be certainly the program needs to be evaluated to determine what's going well and what's not going so well. And it is my hope that I will be able to return to Cox's Bazaar, to return and visit the team in the coming months when travel becomes possible again, to do some data collection and to go support the team. So that is what concludes my presentation. If you are interested in having some more information on mental health in the refugee camps, the UNHCR published a very thorough report in 2019, and I've included the link to it right here. It's called Culture, Context, and Mental Health of Rohingya Refugees, a review for staff in mental health and psychosocial support programs for Rohingya refugees. So I highly recommend giving it a read for anybody who would like to have some more details. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefanie, for this very fascinating presentation. We're going to take questions now from our audience. And if you have a question, just raise your hand. Suzanne, go ahead. Oh.
My question is, what is the population of the camp where Hope Foundation has the field hospital?
So how it works is there are many camps. There's the big camp, Kutupalong refugee camp. Hope Field Hospital is in camp number 4. I do not have the exact number of camp number 4 itself, but what I can say, however, is that the refugee camps in Bangladesh are now close to a total of 900,000 refugees to this day.
Okay, thank you. You're doing amazing work with Hope Foundation through. That's a large population.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. And fortunately, there are other organizations in the MHPSS sector that provide services as well. This is a small program, but thankfully some other primary care organizations have integrated mental health and psychosocial supports in their approach to reach as many people as possible. But even then, it still is not enough.
Okay, another question? Erwin, then Rabina.
Stefanie, thank you so much for your presentation. It was absolutely fascinating to listen to. I don't know very much about mental health interventions in such a catastrophic social situation in which, where do you even start, you know what I mean? I'm very interested in a lot of things that, a lot of like the more practical things that are going on the ground. And I don't know very much about the family structures of Rohingya peoples, but I have the assumption that it's probably a very familial oriented society where the family is a powerful social institution. And so one of the things that I was noticing was in the risk factor links, that there was a lot of concern around the collapse of traditional ways of doing things. There was concern over disorganization of the family structure as kind of a major risk factor in producing mental health problems. And so my question to that is, what what are some of the more practical interventions that were used in order to maintain some type of continuity and solidarity and cohesion in the family unit, so that mental health is addressed not just as a therapeutic reality, but as originating from like changes to the very social relationships that are happening in there. So I'm just interested in what you do, I'm just to maintain that solidarity and prevent familial disorganization.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question, because you're absolutely right. It's not solely about providing psychoeducation or medication. Mental health can be supported in promoting the traditional ways of living, and that's something that has been taken away from a lot of the Rohingya refugees. So while there's no specific program for that at Hope Foundation, we do have some group sessions where people are able to come together and just really open and talk about their feelings, talk about normalizing what's going on for them. So having some support groups for women and for men as well. And outside of Hope Foundation, I think a big thing in the camps, we have safe women's space and safe children's space. That is not necessarily linked to Hope, but that's an approach that is used quite a bit. And in those safe women and safe children's space, that's where they can go back to playing and go back to sewing and do what they would normally have been doing in Myanmar as much as possible. So they have those safe areas that are identified in the camp that they can utilize as much as possible. And as well to go back to regaining a sense of normality as much as possible. There are some education programs available in the camp for children. They are limited, but there's still some small schools where children can go and just be children and play amongst themselves. And that definitely supports mental health in some capacity.
Okay, Ravina.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. That was coming from a context where poverty, there's not that much trauma, but there's quite severe poverty in the area where I work. But what I'm finding, and I'm wondering if in your model you've perhaps found similarly, that the DSM-5 diagnoses are not easily accepted, or maybe the people don't identify with those diagnoses. So was the DSM-5 used as the main diagnostic tool, or were you able to integrate that with the local concepts of mental health?
That's a very, very interesting question. I'm happy you brought this up. Because yes, the concept of mental health as we know it and the language we use for mental health is not adapted to the language that is used amongst the Rohingya communities. So much that one of the main challenges is talking about mental health and explaining what mental health is in the first place, because they have different concepts to explain what it means to them with the mind and the soul. And that's something that is addressed in the UNHCR report. So I really would recommend taking a look at that. It addresses the language and the barriers in that regards. But if you look at MHGAP, they do use the clinical terms such as depression and psychosis. So this is still something that is being used just so that we have a standardized approach as much as possible, and that is coherent between all the different stakeholders that are working in the MHPSS capacity. But definitely language is a barrier, and the way of explaining mental health and the way of breaking down what it means not only is stigmatized, but just also limited because of the sometimes non-existing language in that regards.
Okay, additional questions? I have one, Stefani. Have other countries, what other countries have been supportive of this work with the refugees? I mean, from time to time, there is something in the news here, but not very often. And I learned most of what I learned about what was going on from talking to you and then looking at your website.
Yeah, you know, there's many international organizations involved in the Rohingya refugee crisis. There's nonprofits and NGOs coming from a variety of countries. Now the question sometimes is sustainability. So people come and people go, which is unfortunate. But without being able to name all the countries that are involved, I want to say that yes, some other countries are involved in responding to the crisis. And if I can push it a bit further, I think the reason, because really the Rohingya crisis is not something that we've heard it in the news, obviously, but the information that is shared is still very limited. And I think that is because Bangladesh and Myanmar, the political and economical interests in those countries are not necessarily there, unfortunately, and that's perhaps one of the reasons that explain why there's not as much attention on such a crisis.
You know, in putting together this program, what has been the most challenging thing for you to have to deal with?
Mm-hmm. A lot of things. The most challenging, I'd say the most challenging was really starting from zero, really, because I went there in February of 2019, and I was alone. So my mandate was to create a mental health program for the organization, but I didn't have any human resources. So and that's why I really wanted to break down the different steps with you today, because if someone happens to be in a similar situation where they're asked to implement a mental health program, it's important to know where to start. And for me, it was a challenge, but it was really helpful to be able to be a part of groups such as the MHPSS working group and connect with people who were already actively involved in the camps to know what is working well, what isn't, and what kind of tools are being used, so that we're not working in silo and not duplicating services, really coming together and discussing about what's going well and finding the best approaches in the context.
Okay, we will now close with a thank you from Nurit.
Hi, Stefani. I really want to thank you. I have a little bit knowledge about the refugees in Bangladesh, but you inspire my knowledge, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you that you share with us the overview of the situation, which I myself didn't know much about it, maybe some of the audience here also. And
Yeah.
with this presentation, you just took us to I feel that you give us the opportunity to be in the refugee camp and be with you in the step by step that you organize this program of mental health, which was really very impressive. And it's not only the physical problem. You help us to remind that it's not only the physical problem, but also the mental health problem that we shouldn't forget when we work with the refugees. And it also reminds us how hard it to be a minority, and to thank the people who coming to help them. It's very impressive, and I really want to thank you. And
Thank you.
And to ask you, what makes you to wake up one day and decided that that's what you are going to do? I mean, you live in the north. It's so far from.
What makes
Yeah.
you do it?
It's just that's what sparks the passion in me. It's my background is social work. I became really passionate about mental health. I was doing one-on-one, and I wanted to bring it on a more macroscopic level. My first experience doing some humanitarian work was in Africa, and that really encouraged me to pursue my studies and go learn some more about international development and humanitarian aid to gain the tools to then be able to develop such programs. And it's what I love. I'm combining mental health, my love for mental health, my love for social justice, and my love for international development and community development. And that's still what I'm doing in the North here. So I'm just really grateful for all these opportunities and to have the chance to do that.
You are an
And I'm
inspiration.
grateful to have people like you. Thank you.
You are an
Thank you so
inspiration
much.
to us, Stefani. Everyone, please join me in thanking Stefani.
Thank you very
Everyone,
much. Thank you.
thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Very much,
Thank you.
very much
Thank you.
impressed.
Very awesome.
Thank you. You have enlightened us, and we are grateful to you for that. Thank you very much.
I'm grateful for your
Everyone,
time.
thank you very much for attending Stefani's presentation. We will have it posted on the website probably later today. Thank you, Stefani.
Okay.
Bye,
Thank
Thank you,
everyone.
Brian.
you. Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you.